Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're setting our compass for the bustling heart of New Delhi, where the air literally hums with the energy of a nation on the rise. We're pulling back the curtain on a fascinating, high-stakes game of global diplomacy, where every move on the international chessboard truly counts.
Exactly. And we're talking about India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar. He recently made a pretty bold declaration right there in New Delhi. This was August 23rd, 2025. And his words weren't just, standard diplomatic niceties. They were a really clear statement of India's priorities in a world that's, well, full of trade wars and simmering old rivalries. It's really a story about India protecting its vital interests, think farmers, small businesses, amidst these escalating tensions with the U.S., and of course the ever-present specter of Pakistan.
Right. So we're going to unpack this complex knot step by step. We want to make sure you see the big picture here. Because this isn't just abstract policy, is it? It's about real people and the forces shaping their lives right now.
Absolutely. Real lives, real livelihoods.
Okay, so let's start with the economic front then. Because trade isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's the lifeblood of nations. And we're seeing this standoff between India and the U.S. with tariffs right at the center.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is Jaishankar's very clear statement about red lines. He actually said, and I'm quoting here, "The negotiations are still going on. The bottom line is we have some red lines, and those are the interests of our farmers and small producers. That's not something we can compromise on."
Wow, red lines. That's strong language in diplomacy.
It really is. And you should think of these red lines as sort of invisible fences. They're guarding the very backbone of India's economy. I mean, imagine a small dairy farmer, maybe in Rajasthan, trying to compete against heavily subsidized American milk. It's just not a fair fight.
Right.
And India is absolutely adamant about not playing by rules that stack the deck against its own people. You have to remember, over half of India's population is tied to agriculture.
Half the population. So these aren't minor concerns at all.
Not even close. These are fundamental.
So India's drawing this very firm line. But then this friction, it took a really sharp turn back in July 2025. The U.S. dropped what many people called the tariff hammer. What exactly happened there? What was the immediate fallout?
Yeah, tariff hammer is a good way to put it. So starting August 1st, 2025, Washington imposed a 25% reciprocal tariff on Indian goods.
25%.
And on top of that, an additional penalty was tied specifically to India's dealings with Russia.
Ah, the Russia connection again.
Exactly. And this escalation, it came with some really strong social media commentary from former President Trump. He was blasting India's high tariffs, its close ties with Moscow, especially amid the Ukraine conflict. He even posted something like, "India's tariffs are among the highest in the world."
Okay, so adding fuel to the fire, essentially.
Definitely. He specifically highlighted India's purchases of Russian military gear and energy, too.
But this wasn't entirely out of the blue, right? You said negotiations had been ongoing.
No, not sudden. These talks had been dragging on for months. Key sticking points were things like the U.S. pushing hard for tariff-free access for its agricultural products, dairy, cars, steel.
The usual suspects in trade talks.
Pretty much, and India pushed back, naturally. They were keen to protect their micro, small, and medium enterprises, the MSMEs. They argued that, look, a lower tariff, maybe 15–20%, would keep them competitive with neighbors. Vietnam's got around 20%, Indonesia's about 19%.
So they were proposing a middle ground.
They were trying, but the U.S. held firm. And now, as it stands, some Indian exports are facing tariffs up to 50%.
50%, that's incredibly high.
It's huge, especially compared to others in the region.
And this isn't the first time we've seen this kind of economic friction, is it? I seem to recall something back in 2019.
You're right. The 2019 trade spat, that was when the U.S. revoked India's GSP status, the Generalized System of Preferences.
The GSP. Remind us what that did.
Well, GSP had allowed a lot of Indian products to enter the U.S. completely tariff-free. So revoking it hit about $5.6 billion in Indian exports.
Ouch. Yeah. And India retaliated back then, too, with tariffs on things like U.S. almonds and apples.
So it does seem like this diplomatic dance has some familiar steps.
Familiar and maybe increasingly tense steps this time around.
Okay, let's bring in the energy dimension now, because this is where geopolitics really meets, well, your gas tank, basically. The Russia-Ukraine war obviously shifted the landscape. Western sanctions meant discounted Russian crude oil started flooding the market. How did India play this?
Well, this is where India's pragmatic response really comes into focus. Quite interesting. They basically ramped up imports of Russian oil significantly, became one of Russia's top buyers very quickly.
Just jump right in.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And the numbers show it. In the fiscal year ending March 2025, bilateral trade between Delhi and Moscow hit a record $68.7 billion.
Wow.
And that was largely fueled by these oil deals. India takes this cheaper crude, refines it into fuels like diesel, jet fuel, and then exports them, sometimes to Europe, sometimes even to the U.S. itself.
Really? Exporting refined Russian oil back to the U.S.? Indirectly, yes, as refined products. From India's perspective, it's kind of a win-win. Lower energy costs at home, profits abroad, and you could argue it even helps stabilize global oil prices by absorbing that excess Russian supply.
So it's not just economics. There's a strategic element there, too, almost like a geopolitical masterclass.
You could definitely see it that way. It demonstrates how a sort of non-aligned power can navigate and maybe even profit from a disrupted global market. All without technically breaking sanctions. It subtly challenges the effectiveness of Western pressure.
A shrewd move, definitely sounds like it.
Okay.
But how's Washington reacting? Are they just accepting this pragmatism?
Oh, there's definitely pushback. The U.S. sees it very differently. They've accused India of profiteering by bypassing the spirit, if not the letter, of the sanctions.
Profiteering, strong word.
Very. Peter Navarro, the White House trade advisor, has been particularly vocal. He's basically slammed India for continuing these purchases while the West is footing the bill to support Ukraine.
So the argument is that it undermines the whole sanctions effort.
That's the core argument from the U.S. side, yes, that it weakens the pressure on Russia.
Okay, that's a direct challenge.
Yeah.
Is there merit to that U.S. argument that India's actions, even if legally okay, undermine the bigger picture? And how did Jaishankar specifically respond to that profiteering accusation?
Well, Jaishankar's retort was incredibly sharp.
Yeah.
And very straightforward. It was almost like he was saying, if you have a problem buying oil or refined products from India, then don't buy it.
Okay.
He literally said, nobody is forcing you, but Europe buys, America buys, so if you don't like it, don't buy it.
It is blunt.
Extremely. And it really highlights India's commitment to what they call strategic autonomy. In this multipolar world, India is signaling it refuses to just pick sides. It keeps ties with Russia for energy security, even while it's deepening partnerships with the U.S. in areas like tech and defense.
The balancing act.
A very deliberate one. It's a clear assertion of their sovereign right to make economic decisions based on national interest.
But despite that firm stance, the pressure is still mounting, you mentioned. More tariffs coming.
Yes. That additional 25% tariff specifically on Russian oil-related trade is set to kick in on August 27th, 2025. And there have even been threats from Trump about potentially doubling tariffs to 50% by the following week.
50% again. That could really hurt Indian exports.
Absolutely. It raises a really interesting question, though. China also buys a lot of Russian crude, right?
Right.
Yet it seems to face significantly less public ire from the U.S. on this specific issue. Why the apparent double standard? What's the strategic gamble Washington is making here?
That is a good question. Is it because India is seen differently?
Well, some analysts suggest it's precisely because of India's growing importance. Its clout as a potential counterweight to China, which kind of makes it a prime target for leverage. If the U.S. sees India as strategically vital against China, then pushing them too hard on trade seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does seem risky, alienating a key partner.
Exactly. Maybe Washington thinks India needs the U.S. more than the other way around. Or maybe they're trying to force a clearer alignment, draw India away from Russia more decisively. Economically, though, these oil savings have been significant for India. Billions added to forex reserves annually.
But the looming tariffs could change that calculus.
They certainly could. They risk widening the trade imbalance, maybe causing inflation if import costs rise, or even job losses in export sectors. It's a very delicate balance for India to manage.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit from dollars and cents to borders and, well, historical betrayals, perhaps. Jaishankar didn't just talk trade. He also took aim at the U.S.'s relationship with Pakistan, especially given recent history. What did India find so baffling about this?
Well, what really raised eyebrows in New Delhi was the invitation to Pakistan's Army Chief, General Asim Munir, for a White House visit in June 2025.
His second visit.
In just a few months, yes. And the talks reportedly covered security cooperation, crypto, even critical minerals. And from India's viewpoint, this closeness is just perplexing. Jaishankar had this very sharp quip about it. He said, They have a history with each other, and they have a history of overlooking that history.
Ooh, that's pointed. A subtle dig at overlooking past issues.
Not so subtle, really. It's a direct reminder of past actions, particularly regarding terrorism, that India feels Washington conveniently ignores when dealing with Pakistan.
And for India, seeing that White House visit happen, especially so soon after a major flare-up, and with the shadow of Abbottabad still there, it must seem hypocritical.
That's exactly the perception Jaishankar is highlighting. You need to remember 2011. U.S. Navy SEALs raid a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
Killing Osama bin Laden.
Exactly, the 9/11 mastermind. And he was hiding right near a major Pakistani military academy. That raised huge questions globally about Pakistan's role, or at least complicity, in harboring terrorists.
Right, the how did they not know question.
Precisely. And Jaishankar alluded to this directly. He said something like, when you sometimes look at the certificates a military gives, it's the same military that went into Abbottabad and found you-know-who there.
Wow, drawing a direct line.
A very direct line. Yet, fast forward to 2025, and General Munir is at the White House, even as Pakistan continues to face accusations from India about supporting terrorism in Kashmir.
And this ties into a very recent, very dangerous incident, doesn't it? Operation Sindoor.
It absolutely does. Operation Sindoor wasn't just a minor skirmish. This was a really intense 4-day military exchange in May 2025. It genuinely had the world holding its breath.
How did it start?
It kicked off on May 7th after a deadly terrorist attack in Pahalgam, Kashmir. India blamed Pakistan-based militants. In response, India launched what it called precision strikes across the line of control. That's the de facto border in Kashmir.
Using standoff weapons, you said, to avoid escalation.
That was the stated aim, yes. Using weapons fired from a distance to hit specific targets, allegedly Jaish-e-Mohammed camps, a group linked to Pakistan.
Jaish-e-Mohammed, responsible for past attacks too.
Exactly. The operation's name, Sindoor, the vermilion mark, perhaps symbolizing Indian resolve.
And then Pakistan responded. Things escalated quickly.
Very quickly, Pakistan launched air incursions. This led to actual dogfights between jets.
Real dogfights.
Yes, air-to-air combat, plus artillery duels across the Laskhar. Both sides reported casualties. Pakistan claimed around 40 civilian deaths and said they downed Indian jets.
And India's claim.
India maintained it successfully hit the terror camps and was evolving its strategy against cross-border threats. It was a brutal reminder of how volatile things are just weeks before Munir's visit to D.C.
And how did it end? Was there outside mediation?
A ceasefire was thankfully agreed upon by May 11th. Both sides started talking about troop reductions, but crucially, this truce was brokered directly via the hotlines between the Indian and Pakistani military commands. No external intervention.
Directly negotiated. Okay.
Yes. India's Air Force Chief ACM AP Singh later talked about it as part of evolving strategies, referencing past crises like the 2019 Balakot strikes. It showed India's shift towards a more proactive defense posture.
But then the U.S. enters the picture again, claiming credit.
Well, this is where President Trump comes back in. He repeatedly claimed he personally mediated that truce.
Claimed credit for the ceasefire.
Yes, even suggested it was a diplomatic win, possibly worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize.
How did India, specifically Jaishankar, react to that claim?
Jaishankar shut that down very firmly. He basically said, look, it's one thing to acknowledge countries make phone calls during crises. That's just normal diplomacy. But, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, to claim credit for a ceasefire that was hammered out directly between India and Pakistan, that's something else entirely.
So pushing back hard against any idea of U.S. mediation.
Absolutely. India has been consistent for decades on this. Talks with Pakistan must be bilateral. No third-party interference. That goes back to the Simla Agreement of 1972. So any U.S. claim of mediation directly undermines that core principle. India made it crystal clear. We handled this ourselves, no outsiders needed.
Okay, so if we tie all these threads together, the trade battles, the Russian oil deals, the complex relationship with Pakistan, the pushback against the U.S. claims, what's the bigger picture here? What does this tell us about India's place in the world and its goals?
I think the deeper theme, the real takeaway, is India's unwavering quest for strategic autonomy. In a world where alliances are shifting, the U.S. is pushing India to align more clearly, perhaps against Russia, maybe even China.
But India is resisting that.
Clearly. New Delhi is charting its own course, making decisions based purely on what it perceives as its national interest. And if you connect this to the wider picture, look at India's ties with China. They seem to be improving, but independently. It's not happening because of strains with the U.S.
Interesting. So it's not a reaction, it's a separate track?
Exactly. And this independent approach, it inevitably tests alliances like the Quad, the US, India, Japan, Australia group.
which was largely seen as a counterweight to China.
Right. So if US pressure ends up alienating India, who benefits? Potentially Beijing. It's a complex dynamic.
And economically, despite all this friction, India seems quite resilient.
Remarkably so, in many ways. The economy is growing at around 7%, which is outpacing many other major economies. Those billions saved from Russian oil certainly help bolster the forex reserves. And initiatives like Make in India seem to be gaining some real traction, attracting big names like Apple, Tesla.
But there's a potential downside to this strategic autonomy, isn't there? Some critics might say that India's actions, especially with Russia, could strain relationships with key democratic partners like the U.S. Is there a risk of becoming strategically isolated?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And it's a valid concern from an outside perspective. India's leadership, particularly Jaishankar, would likely argue strongly against that framing. They'd say it's not isolation, it's pragmatic balancing in a multipolar world. Their view is probably that a strong, independent India is actually a more valuable partner to everyone in the long run, rather than an India forced into alignment.
So strength through independence, essentially.
That seems to be the philosophy. But yes, it comes with challenges. Potential inflation, job losses we mentioned. It's a high-wire act. And, it's quite telling, maybe even a bit entertaining, to hear some of Jaishankar's diplomatic language. He made that remark, something like, it's funny to have people who work for a pro-business American administration accusing others of doing business.
Another sharp observation.
It's more than just rhetoric, isn't it? It's diplomatic wit, but with incredibly high stakes behind it. It underscores what India sees as hypocrisy, criticizing them for what is essentially, from their view, just good business sense.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it really feels like Jaishankar's declarations aren't just speeches. They're more like a roadmap for India's future trajectory. By drawing these very firm red lines on trade, on sovereignty, India is asserting its place. It's balancing economics, national security, and always keeping its own people's interests front and center.
Indeed. The trade talks will continue, no doubt. But India's stance seems pretty unwavering right now. Protect our people, preserve our independence, and play the long game. And this isn't just abstract geopolitics. It impacts everything from the price of goods you might buy to global stability, ensuring food security for over 1 billion people, and maybe even reducing those scary headlines about potential nuclear flashpoints between India and Pakistan.
So what does this all mean for you listening in? Well, whether you're tracking global markets or just wondering about the price of your next phone or car part, these high-level decisions genuinely shape your world. And it leaves us with a big question. In a world that's constantly shifting, how will other nations react long-term to India's steadfast commitment to its own path, especially when it bumps up against traditional alliances?
Right. And what is this broader trend, more nations seeking their own strategic autonomy, prioritizing national interests over old blocs, what does that mean for the future of global power dynamics itself?
Definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.